The distant howl of wolves echoed across the Montana territory as Delilah Valero clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her trembling fingers brushing against the small, firm swell of her growing child. February 1879 had brought more than just bitter winds to the small mining settlement of Copper Creek. It had brought fear back into her life. "Madam, train's stopping here for water. 20 minutes if you need to stretch your legs," the conductor announced, tipping his hat as he passed through the passenger car. Delilah nodded gratefully, rising with some effort from the hard wooden bench. 5 months with child and 3 months a widow, she carried 2 burdens, one growing heavier with each passing day, the other weighing on her heart like an anvil. Thomas had been a good husband, a mining engineer with promising prospects until the cave-in that had claimed his life. What the other passengers couldn't see was that she was running from something far more dangerous than grief. The small platform at Copper Creek Station stood windswept and nearly deserted as Delilah descended from the train. Her dark hair whipped around her face as she took in the rustic buildings that made up the main street. A general store, a saloon, the sheriff's office, and what appeared to be a small hotel. This wasn't her destination she was bound for. Helena, where Thomas's cousin had offered her shelter, but she needed these few minutes of fresh air. "Miss, you dropped this." The voice came from behind her, deep and steady. Turning, Delilah found herself looking up at a tall man holding out the handkerchief that had slipped from her pocket. Weathered skin spoke of years under the sun, but his eyes, clear blue like a summer sky, held a gentleness that contrasted with his rugged appearance. A dusty Stetson sat atop dark blonde hair that curled slightly at the collar of his sheepskin coat. "Thank you," she murmured, accepting the handkerchief, her fingers brushing against his calloused ones. "Name's Declan Whitaker," he said with a slight tip of his hat. "Don't often see ladies traveling alone in these parts." Something in his tone made her hesitate, not threatening, but observant. Too observant. "I'm not alone," she lied, one hand instinctively moving to her stomach. "My husband's meeting me in Helena." The man's eyes followed her movement, softening with understanding. "Of course, madam. Safe travels to you both." The train whistle blew, signaling passengers to return. As Delilah turned to board, she caught sight of a familiar figure at the far end of the platform. Her blood ran cold. It couldn't be. Not here. The man's dark coat and distinctive hat were unmistakable one of Henry Blackwell's men. They had found her trail. Panic rose in her throat as she hurried back to the train, nearly stumbling on the steps. Once inside the passenger car, she pressed herself against the window, watching as the man scanned the platform, his hand resting casually on his holstered revolver. "Something troubling you, madam?" Declan Whitaker had boarded the same car and now stood in the aisle beside her seat, his expression concerned. "No, she began, but the words died in her throat as the train lurched forward. Through the window, she saw Blackwell's man speaking urgently to another figure who had emerged from the telegraph office. "I think I need to get off at the next stop," she whispered, more to herself than to Declan. The cowboy's eyes narrowed slightly, taking in her pale face and trembling hands. Without asking permission, he settled into the empty seat across from her. "Madam, I don't mean to pry, but it seems to me you might be in some kind of trouble. And in my experience, trouble has a way of following folks who ain't prepared for it." Delilah stared at him, weighing her options. This stranger might be her only chance at escape, or he could be another danger entirely. "My name is Delilah Valero," she finally said, her voice barely audible above the clacking of the train wheels. "And you're right, I'm in trouble." Declan leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. "I reckon it's the kind that's riding a horse and carrying a gun." A humorless laugh escaped her lips. "More than one gun. My husband Thomas was killed in a mining accident 3 months ago. At least, that's what everyone was told." Understanding dawned in Declan's eyes. "But you don't believe it was an accident?" Delilah shook her head, her hand protectively covering her belly. Thomas discovered something in the mine owner's ledgers, discrepancies, money being funneled somewhere it shouldn't. He was going to report it, but she swallowed hard. The next day, there was a cave-in that only claimed one life. "And now they're after you," Declan concluded. "Because of what you might know?" "Because of what I have," she corrected him. Thomas gave me documents before he died. Proof of what Henry Blackwell and his partners have been doing. I thought I was safe, that they believed I knew nothing, but last week one of Blackwell's men came to my home. I barely escaped with the clothes on my back and my husband's papers. The train began to slow as it approached a water stop, a remote location, with nothing but a water tower and a small maintenance shed. "This isn't a proper station," Declan observed, peering out the window. "It's my only chance," Delilah said, gathering her small carpet bag. "They'll be waiting at the next scheduled stop." Declan's jaw set with determination. "Then I'm coming with you." "You don't even know me," she protested, even as relief flooded through her. "I know enough," he replied, standing and offering his hand. "I know you're carrying a child and running from dangerous men. That's enough for me to offer my help." As the train groaned to a halt, Declan guided her quickly to the rear of the car. "Stay close," he murmured, scanning the platform before helping her down. The water stop was deserted except for a lone attendant who paid them little mind as they slipped away from the train and toward a stand of pine trees that bordered a small creek. "I have a horse stabled in town," Declan said, leading her deeper into the cover of the trees. "It's about 3 miles back to Copper Creek. Can you make it?" Delilah straightened her shoulders. "I have no choice." "You have one now," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You've got someone riding with you." The walk back to town was arduous for Delilah. Though she had been active throughout her pregnancy, the stress of recent days had taken its toll. Declan moved at a steady pace, occasionally offering his arm over rough terrain, but never treating her as though she were helpless. "You said you have documents," he said, as they paused by the creek for her to rest. "What exactly do they show?" Delilah reached into her bodice and withdrew a folded packet of papers. "The Blackwell Mining Company has been falsifying reports to investors while skimming profits. But worse, they've been ignoring safety concerns in the mines. Thomas's death wasn't the first, just the most convenient for them." Declan examined the papers, his expression growing darker. "This is more than just theft. This is murder by negligence." "Which is why they want these papers and me gone," Delilah said, taking back the documents and carefully tucking them away. "Thomas wanted to take these to the territorial governor. He believed the governor would act." "Governor Potts is a fair man," Declan agreed, "but Helena's still a long way from here, especially with Blackwell's men on your trail." He helped her to her feet. "We need to get you somewhere safe first." As they approached the outskirts of Copper Creek, Declan guided her toward a small cabin set apart from the main street. "My friend Jack runs the livery," he explained. "He'll help us without asking too many questions." The bearded man who answered Declan's knock took in the situation with a quick glance. "Trouble?" he asked simply. "The kind that needs fast horses and a quiet exit," Declan confirmed. Jack nodded. "Come in then. The lady looks like she could use some rest and food." Inside the modest cabin, Delilah sank gratefully onto a chair, while Jack busied himself at the stove, reheating a pot of stew. Declan outlined their situation in terse sentences, omitting details but conveying the urgency. "Blackwell's a powerful man in these parts," Jack warned, setting a bowl of stew before Delilah. "His reach extends to most lawmen in the territory." "Not all of them," Declan replied meaningfully. Jack raised an eyebrow. "You thinking of taking her to Dawson?" "He's the only one I trust not to be in Blackwell's pocket." "Who is Dawson?" Delilah asked, the warm stew reviving her spirits somewhat. "Marshal Curtis Dawson," Declan explained. "He operates out of a settlement about 30 miles northeast of here. He's as honest as they come, and has no love for mining magnates like Blackwell." 30 miles, Delilah repeated, trying to keep the weariness from her voice. "In my condition—" "We'll take it slow," Declan assured her. "Jack can lend us his wagon, more comfortable for you, and less noticeable than 2 riders." Jack nodded. "I'll get it ready. You both should rest a few hours. Best to leave after dark anyway." As Jack left to prepare the wagon, Delilah studied Declan's face in the lantern light. "Why are you helping me? You're risking a lot for a stranger." Declan was silent for a moment, staring into the fire. "My sister was married to a man who worked the silver mines in Nevada. Conditions were bad, men dying every month from cave-ins, bad air, equipment failures. When her husband tried to organize the workers to demand better safety, there was an accident." His voice hardened. She lost him and their unborn child from the grief that followed. Understanding dawned in Delilah's eyes. "I'm so sorry. Men like Blackwell think their money puts them above the law, above basic human decency," Declan continued. "I couldn't help my sister then, but I can help you now." The quiet intensity of his words settled around Delilah like a protective cloak. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt something beyond fear and grief, a flicker of hope. "You should rest," Declan said, gentler now. "I'll wake you when it's time to leave." Delilah nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. Jack had prepared a small bedroom, and she gratefully stretched out on the narrow bed. Despite her intention to remain vigilant, sleep claimed her almost immediately. She woke to Declan's gentle touch on her shoulder. Outside, full darkness had fallen, and from the position of the moon visible through the small window, she guessed it was well past midnight. "It's time," he said quietly. "Jack's got the wagon ready." The night air was crisp and clear as they emerged from the cabin. Jack had prepared a farm wagon with a canvas cover, simple but sturdy. A team of 2 horses stomped impatiently, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I've packed provisions for several days," Jack said, handing Declan a rifle. "And this, just in case." Declan nodded his thanks, helping Delilah up onto the wagon seat before climbing up beside her. "We'll stick to the back trails," he told her, taking up the reins. "It'll take longer, but we're less likely to encounter trouble." As they set off, Delilah glanced back at the small town of Copper Creek, its windows dark except for the saloon that still glowed with lamplight. Somewhere in that town, men were searching for her men who wouldn't hesitate to kill a pregnant widow for the papers she carried. The wagon moved steadily through the night, following old game trails and logging roads that only someone intimately familiar with the territory would know. Declan handled the team with quiet confidence, occasionally pointing out landmarks barely visible in the moonlight. "There used to be a trading post there," he said, indicating a dark shape that might have been a chimney. "And over that ridge is the old Flathead hunting ground, beautiful country and daylight." His easy conversation calmed her nerves, drawing her attention away from the shadows that seemed to press in around them. As the night deepened, he draped an extra blanket around her shoulders, his fingers lingering briefly on her arm, a small gesture of reassurance. "How did you come to know this area so well?" she asked. "Spent most of my life in Montana Territory," he replied. "Was a cavalry scout for a few years after the war, then tried my hand at prospecting. These days I run cattle on a small spread about 20 miles from here." "A rancher?" she said with a small smile. "Thomas always talked about having land someday, raising horses." "It's a good life," Declan agreed. "Hard work, but honest. At the end of the day, a man can see what he's built with his own hands." The simple truth of his words warmed something in Delilah's heart. Thomas had been a dreamer, full of plans and schemes. Declan seemed to be a man who made his own quiet way in the world, steady as the mountains that surrounded them. They traveled through the night and into the early morning hours. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Declan guided the wagon into a sheltered ravine where a small stream provided water for the horses. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he said, helping her down from the wagon seat. "Get some sleep if you can. I'll keep watch." Delilah wanted to protest that he needed rest too, but the weariness in her bones won out. Declan arranged blankets in the back of the wagon, creating a makeshift bed that was surprisingly comfortable. As she drifted off to sleep, she was aware of him settling nearby, rifle across his lap, his solid presence a bulwark against her fears. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet movement. Sitting up, she found Declan tending a small, nearly smokeless fire where a pot of coffee brewed, alongside a pan of frying bacon. "Good morning," he greeted her with a smile that reached his eyes. "Hungry?" The simple meal of bacon, hardtack, and strong coffee was the best Delilah had tasted in weeks. As she ate, Declan studied a crude map that Jack had provided. "If we keep to this route, we should reach Dawson's settlement by nightfall tomorrow," he said. "There's an abandoned trapper's cabin about 10 miles ahead, where we can rest tonight." "Do you think they're following us?" Delilah asked, voicing the fear that had haunted her through the night. Declan's expression grew serious. "Likely. Blackwell's men aren't fools. They'll figure out we doubled back to Copper Creek, and Jack can only stall them so long. He folded the map carefully. But we've got a good head start, and they'll be expecting you to head straight for Helena. As they continued their journey, the terrain grew more rugged. The wagon jolted over uneven ground, each bump sending painful jarring through Delilah's body. She tried not to show her discomfort, but Declan's observant eyes missed little. We'll stop more often, he decided after a particularly rough stretch. It's not good for you or the baby to be jostled so much. I'm stronger than I look, she protested. I don't doubt that, he replied with a gentle smile. But there's no shame in needing care, especially now. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising snow. Declan pushed the horses a bit harder, eager to reach the trapper's cabin before the weather turned. As the first flakes began to fall, a small log structure came into view, nestled against a rocky outcropping that would shield it from the worst of the wind. Not much to look at, Declan acknowledged as he helped her down, but it'll keep us dry. The cabin was rustic but sound, with a stone fireplace and rough-hewn furniture that had weathered many seasons. While Delilah rested on a bench, Declan efficiently prepared the space, sweeping out debris, checking the chimney, and starting a fire that soon filled the small room with welcome warmth. Outside, the snow fell more heavily, blanketing the landscape in white silence. After tending to the horses in a lean-to attached to the cabin, Declan prepared a simple supper from their provisions. As they ate, the wind picked up, howling around the eaves of the small structure. Storms setting in, he observed. Might slow us down tomorrow, but it'll cover our tracks too. Delilah nodded, trying to find comfort in this silver lining. How far do you think they are behind us? Hard to say, but this weather works in our favor. He studied her face in the firelight. You should try to sleep. Take the bed, I'll be fine here by the fire. The bed was little more than a platform of wooden planks with a thin mattress stuffed with pine needles, but to Delilah's exhausted body, it felt like luxury. As she settled under the blankets, she watched Declan banking the fire for the night, his movements efficient and deliberate. Declan, she said softly. When he looked up, she continued, Thank you, not just for helping me, but for... She struggled to find the words. For treating me like a person, not just a burden. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes, a gentleness in the set of his mouth. You're far from a burden, Delilah Valero. You're one of the bravest women I've ever met. Sleep came easier that night, despite the howling wind and her uncertain future. In the small cabin, with Declan's steady presence nearby, Delilah found a moment of peace she hadn't known since Thomas's death. Morning brought clear skies and a transformed landscape. Snow lay thick on the ground, pristine and unmarked except for the tracks of small animals. After a quick breakfast, they set out again, the wagon moving more slowly through the fresh snow. Good news and bad news, Declan said as they navigated a narrow trail between pine trees. Snow makes the going slower, but it also means we can see if anyone's been this way. They traveled through the day, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and for Delilah to stretch her increasingly uncomfortable back. By late afternoon, they had covered perhaps 15 miles, good progress considering the conditions, but still leaving them short of their destination. As the sun began to set, Declan grew more alert, frequently scanning the trail behind them. Something's not right, he murmured, more to himself than to Delilah. What is it? She asked, tension immediately returning to her shoulders. No sign of pursuit, he said, not a single track following ours. Isn't that good? Could be. Or it could mean they know something we don't. He flicked the reins, urging the horses to a slightly faster pace. I'd feel better if we could reach Dawson's settlement tonight. The horses struggled through deepening snow as darkness fell. Declan lit a lantern, its yellow glow creating a small circle of visibility in the gathering gloom. They had just crested a small rise when a sound split the night, the sharp crack of a rifle shot, followed by the splintering of wood as the bullet struck the wagon just inches from Delilah's head. Get down, Declan commanded, pushing her below the level of the wagon seat. He snapped the reins hard, and the horses lunged forward, the wagon careening down the slope as more shots rang out behind them. Delilah clung to the seat, one arm wrapped protectively around her belly as the wagon bounced and swayed. Declan handled the team masterfully, guiding them through the trees while presenting a difficult target for whoever was shooting at them. A fork in the trail appeared suddenly in the lantern light. Declan made a split-second decision. Pulling the horses sharply to the right, down a narrower path that descended steeply into a ravine. "Hold on," he warned as the wagon picked up speed on the downslope. The horses were nearly at a gallop now, hooves throwing up plumes of snow. Behind them, Delilah could hear shouts and the sound of pursuing riders. At the bottom of the ravine, the trail widened alongside a frozen creek. Declan urged the horses onto the ice, the wagon sliding precariously but moving faster without the drag of snow. "If we can reach the settlement," he shouted over the noise of the horses and wagon, "Dawson's men will help us." Another shot rang out, closer this time. Declan grunted, and Delilah looked up in alarm to see him clutching his left arm, blood seeping between his fingers. "You're hit!" "It's nothing," he insisted, though his face had gone pale in the lantern light. "Just a graze." The creek bed curved sharply ahead, and as they rounded the bend, lights appeared in the distance, the windows of cabins and buildings that made up the small settlement. Declan raised his voice in a shout that carried through the cold night air. "Marshal! Riders coming in hot! Marshal Dawson!" The response was immediate. Men emerged from buildings, rifles ready. As the wagon clattered into the main street, Declan pulled the exhausted horses to a halt. Within moments, they were surrounded by armed men, their weapons pointed outward, toward the direction they had come. A tall figure pushed through the crowd, a broad-shouldered man with a silver star pinned to his heavy coat. "Whitaker, what in blazes?" "Blackwell's men," Declan explained tersely, his hand still pressed to his bleeding arm. "Lady's got evidence of their crimes. They want her silenced." Marshal Dawson's weathered face hardened as he took in Delilah's condition and Declan's wound. "Get them inside," he ordered. "Johnson, Davis set up a perimeter. Anyone approaches who ain't one of ours, you challenge them proper before shooting, you hear?" Strong hands helped Delilah down from the wagon and guided her toward a solid log building that served as the marshal's office and jailhouse. Inside, a pot-bellied stove radiated welcome heat. Declan followed, his face growing paler, but his steps steady. "Sit, both of you," Dawson instructed. "Miller, fetch the doc. Rest of you, back to your posts." As the room cleared, Delilah found herself seated on a bench beside Declan. Despite his obvious pain, his first concern was for her. "Are you all right? The baby?" "We're fine," she assured him, reaching for his injured arm. "Let me see." Reluctantly, he allowed her to push aside his coat and examine the wound. The bullet had carved a furrow along his upper arm, painful but not life-threatening. Using water from a pitcher on the marshal's desk, she cleaned away the blood as best she could. "Now," Marshal Dawson said, settling into a chair across from them, "suppose you tell me what this is all about." Between them, Delilah and Declan related the full story: Thomas's discovery, his murder disguised as an accident, Delilah's flight with the incriminating documents, and Blackwell's pursuit. Dawson listened without interruption, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. "I've had my suspicions about Blackwell for years," he said when they had finished. "Man's operations have the highest accident rate in the territory, yet somehow he always comes up clean in investigations." He leaned forward. "Those papers you're carrying could finally bring him down." "If we can get them to Governor Potts," Delilah said. Dawson nodded. "And we will. But first, we need to deal with the men on your trail." A commotion outside drew their attention. The door opened to admit a deputy, his face flushed with cold and excitement. "Marshal, riders approaching from the south. 6 men, all armed." "Blackwell's men," Declan said, rising despite his injury. "They followed us." "Stay put," Dawson ordered. "You've done your part getting the lady here safely." To his deputy, he said, "Tell the men to hold positions but don't fire unless fired upon. I want to talk to these fellows first." As Dawson strode out, Delilah turned to Declan. "You need a doctor for that arm." "It'll keep," he replied, his eyes on the door. "I'm not leaving you alone." The town doctor arrived moments later, a gray-haired man with spectacles and a no-nonsense manner. He examined Declan's wound efficiently, cleaning and bandaging it while delivering a running commentary on "fool cowboys who get themselves shot playing hero." Through the windows, they could hear Dawson's voice, amplified to carry across the street. This is United States Marshal Curtis Dawson. You men are trespassing on federal land. State your business or turn around. A deeper voice responded, though the words were indistinct. Dawson's reply was clear enough. I don't care who you work for. There's no one here by that description. Now, either put up your hands and come in peaceable, or ride out while you still can. Tension stretched like a bowstring. Delilah held her breath, her hand finding Declan's uninjured one. His fingers closed around hers, warm and reassuring. The sound of retreating hoofbeats broke the silence. The deputy returned, his expression relieved. They're leaving, Marshal says, but he's keeping men on watch through the night, just to be sure. Dawson himself returned shortly after. They've withdrawn for now, he confirmed, but Blackwell's not a man to give up easily. I'm sending a telegram to the territorial capital tonight. By morning, I want a federal escort here to take you and those documents to the governor. Relief washed over Delilah, followed quickly by bone-deep exhaustion. The events of the past days, the desperate flight, the pursuit, the fear suddenly caught up with her. She swayed slightly on the bench. Dawson noticed immediately. Mrs. Valero needs rest. Doc, is your wife still taking in boarders? The doctor nodded. Martha will be glad for the company. We've got a proper room with a real bed best in town for a lady in her condition. And Whitaker can bunk here, Dawson added. No? Delilah's voice was soft but firm. I'd feel safer if he stayed nearby. She met Dawson's questioning look steadily. He's risked everything to protect me. I trust him with my life. Something in her tone must have convinced the marshal, for he simply nodded. Doc's got a spare room. You can stand guard from there, Whitaker, if the lady insists. The doctor's home was comfortable and welcoming. His wife, a motherly woman with kind eyes, took one look at Delilah's exhausted face and pregnant belly and immediately set about making her comfortable. A hot bath was prepared, clean clothes found, and a hearty meal served despite the late hour. Declan was given the small room across the hall from Delilah's. Though pale from blood loss and clearly in pain, he insisted on checking the windows and doors of the house before allowing himself to rest. Marshall's got men watching, he assured Delilah as she prepared to retire. But I'll be right across the hall if you need anything. Anything at all. The earnestness in his voice brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. Morning brought weak sunshine and news that the federal escort would arrive by noon. Delilah, rested and somewhat recovered from the ordeal, sat at the doctor's kitchen table while his wife prepared breakfast. Declan joined them, his injured arm in a sling, but color returned to his face. Marshall says no sign of Blackwell's men through the night, he reported. Seems they've pulled back to regroup. Or to plan something else, Delilah said, unable to shake the feeling that the danger had merely receded, not disappeared. Her intuition proved correct. As they finished breakfast, a breathless deputy arrived at the door. Marshall needs you both at the office right away. Telegram just came in from Copper Creek. At the marshal's office, Dawson's expression was grave. Jack Tanner's been shot, he said without preamble. He's alive, but badly wounded. Blackwell's men tried to force information from him about where you'd gone. Declan's face hardened. Jack's a good man. He wouldn't tell them anything. Apparently not, Dawson agreed, which is why they've taken a different approach. He handed Declan a telegram. This arrived 10 minutes ago. Declan read it aloud. To Mrs. Delilah Valero, return what belongs to the Blackwell Mining Company and surrender yourself at Copper Creek within 2 days, or we burn every building in the settlement. This includes the school with its 43 children. Henry Blackwell. Silence fell over the office. Delilah's hand went protectively to her belly, horror washing through her. He wouldn't. Children? He would, Dawson said grimly. Blackwell's desperate. Those documents you're carrying could send him to prison for years. Men like him don't hesitate to use innocent lives as leverage. Then I have to go back, Delilah said, rising unsteadily to her feet. I can't be responsible for children dying. No, Declan's voice was sharp. That's exactly what he wants. The moment you hand over those papers, you and everyone in that town are as good as dead anyway. Dawson nodded in agreement. Whitaker's right. Giving in to Blackwell's demands won't save those people. It will only ensure your death and his freedom to continue exploiting and killing minors. Then what can we do? Delilah asked, desperation edging her voice. Dawson spread a map on his desk. The federal escort will be here by noon. We'll send the documents with them to the governor while we ride for Copper Creek. His finger traced the route. If we push hard, we can be there by tomorrow night. We? Declan questioned. I'm deputizing every able man in the settlement, Dawson said. 20 armed lawmen should give Blackwell pause. Declan's eyes met Delilah's across the desk. And Mrs. Valero? She stays here, under protection, Dawson began, but Delilah cut him off. No. Her voice was steady now, determination replacing fear. This is my fight. Thomas died for these documents for the truth they contain. I won't hide while others risk their lives. Delilah, Declan said gently, think of your child. I am, she replied. I'm thinking of the world my child will be born into. A world where men like Blackwell can threaten school children and murder with impunity, or a world where justice prevails. She straightened her shoulders. I'm coming with you. The argument that followed was heated but brief. In the end, Dawson reluctantly agreed that Delilah could travel with them, not to the confrontation itself, but to a safe location nearby where she could identify Blackwell and his men for the marshal's benefit. By mid-afternoon, the federal escort had departed for Helena with the incriminating documents, and Dawson's makeshift posse was preparing to ride for Copper Creek. Delilah, dressed in warm clothes borrowed from the doctor's wife, waited beside a wagon that would carry her and supplies for the journey. Declan approached, leading his horse. Despite the marshal's objections, he had insisted on riding rather than traveling in the wagon. His left arm remained in a sling, but his right was more than capable of handling a rifle. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. It's not too late to stay here. Delilah looked up at him, studying the lines of concern etched around his eyes. In the few days since their paths had crossed, something had shifted between them, a connection forged in danger and mutual respect. I'm sure, she said. Besides, I have you to protect me, don't I? A small smile touched his lips. Until my last breath. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Before Delilah could respond, Marshal Dawson called for the company to move out. The journey to Copper Creek was tense but uneventful. They traveled through the day and into the evening, stopping only when darkness made further progress impossible. Camp was made in a sheltered valley, fires kept low to avoid detection. Delilah found herself sitting beside Declan as they shared a simple meal of beans and hardtack. Around them, the marshal's men spoke in hushed voices, checking weapons and discussing strategy for the coming confrontation. Are you holding up all right? Declan asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. She nodded, absently rubbing her lower back where the day's travel had left an aching knot. I keep thinking about Thomas, about what he would want me to do. What do you think that is? Delilah considered the question seriously. He would want me to be safe, of course, but more than that, he would want the truth to come out. He believed in justice. He sounds like a good man, Declan said. He was. She looked up at the stars visible between the pine branches overhead. But he was also a dreamer, always chasing the next opportunity, the next big strike. A small, sad smile touched her lips. Sometimes I think he loved the idea of our future more than he loved our present. Declan was quiet for a moment. And what do you want, Delilah? Beyond surviving this, I mean. The question caught her by surprise. Since Thomas's death, even before it, if she were honest, she had been focused on immediate concerns, survival, safety, justice. The future beyond those imperatives seemed misty and uncertain. I want, she began, then paused, searching for the right words. I want peace, a place where my child can grow up safe and loved, a life that's steady, not built on dreams that might never come true. Declan nodded, understanding in his eyes. Simple things, but not always easy to find. What about you? She asked. What does Declan Whitaker want from life? He looked into the dying embers of their small fire. Much the same, I reckon. My ranch is small, but good land, could support a family. His eyes met hers briefly before returning to the fire. Always thought I'd find someone to share it with someday. The simple honesty of his words touched something deep in Delilah's heart. Before she could respond, Marshal Dawson approached, ending the moment. "We'll reach Copper Creek by mid-morning tomorrow," he informed them. "Mrs. Valero, I'll need you to identify Blackwell and his key men from a safe distance. Can you do that?" "Yes," she assured him. "I know what they look like." Dawson nodded. "Good. Now both of you get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." As predicted, they arrived on the outskirts of Copper Creek just before noon the following day. From a ridge overlooking the settlement, Dawson surveyed the situation through a spyglass. "Main Street looks normal enough," he reported. "People going about their business. No sign of armed men, but that doesn't mean they're not there." He passed the spyglass to Delilah. "Can you see Blackwell or any of his men?" She scanned the street carefully. "The man in the black coat outside the hotel, that's Samuel Griffin, Blackwell's foreman. And there, by the general store, the one with the red vest. That's Collins, another of his men. And Blackwell himself," Delilah continued searching until her breath caught. "There, coming out of the telegraph office, tall man with the silver-handled cane." Dawson took back the spyglass, studying the figure she had identified. "Fancy dresser for a mining town," he observed. "How many men does he usually have with him?" "At least 6 that I've seen," Delilah replied, "all armed." Dawson turned to his deputies. "We'll split into 3 groups. Carson, you take 5 men and secure the school. Get those children somewhere safe. Mitchell, you and your group circle around behind the saloon and mining office. The rest come with me through the main street." He checked his pocket watch. "We move in 1 hour." As the men prepared, checking weapons and reviewing their assignments, Declan drew Delilah aside. "You'll stay here with Deputy Willis," he said. "He'll keep you safe until we secure the town." She nodded, suddenly afraid not for herself, but for him. "Your arm is fine enough for what needs doing," he assured her, though they both knew he was at a disadvantage with only one good arm. Impulsively, she reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Be careful, Declan." He caught her hand, holding it against his cheek for a moment before pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "I intend to come back to you, Delilah Valero. We have unfinished conversations." The hours seemed to stretch endlessly as Delilah watched the marshal's men take their positions. Deputy Willis, a young man barely out of his teens, stood vigilant beside her, rifle ready, but his eyes constantly darting to the action below. When Dawson's group entered the main street, the reaction was immediate. Townspeople scattered, ducking into doorways and behind water troughs. Blackwell's men reached for weapons, but found themselves suddenly outnumbered and surrounded. From her vantage point, Delilah could see Declan moving with Dawson's group, his rifle held one-handed but steady. When Blackwell himself emerged from the saloon, Dawson called out in a voice that carried clearly to the ridge. "Henry Blackwell, you're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Valero and conspiracy to commit further crimes. Drop your weapons and surrender." For a moment it seemed Blackwell might comply. Then, with a shout to his men, he drew a pistol from his coat. Gunfire erupted in the street below. Delilah gasped, her hands clutching at Deputy Willis's arm. "Declan! Stay down, madam," Willis urged, positioning himself between her and the gunfight below. The exchange of gunfire was brief but intense. When it ended, 2 of Blackwell's men lay motionless in the street. The others, including Blackwell himself, had been disarmed and surrounded. "It's over," Willis said with relief. "Marshall's got them." But even as the words left his mouth, movement caught Delilah's eye, a figure emerging from between buildings, rifle raised and aimed directly at Declan's back as he helped secure the prisoners. "Declan!" she screamed, the sound lost in the distance and confusion below. Without thinking, Delilah grabbed Willis's pistol from its holster and fired. The shot went wide, but it was enough to alert Declan, who spun just as the hidden gunman fired. Declan dropped and rolled, coming up with his own rifle. His shot was more accurate, the gunman staggered and fell. "Mrs. Valero!" Willis exclaimed, reclaiming his pistol. That was necessary," she finished for him, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "Now, please, take me down there." By the time they reached the town, order had been restored. Blackwell and his surviving men were securely bound and under guard. Marshal Dawson was speaking with the town sheriff, a nervous-looking man who seemed relieved to relinquish authority to the federal marshal. Declan saw Delilah approaching and broke away from the group, meeting her halfway down the street. Without a word, he pulled her into a one-armed embrace, holding her tightly against his chest. "That shot from the ridge," he said against her hair. "That was you, wasn't it?" She nodded against his shoulder. "He was going to shoot you in the back." Declan pulled back just enough to look into her face. Wonder and something deeper in his eyes. "Seems I owe you my life, Delilah Valero." "Consider it payment for saving mine," she replied with a small smile. Marshal Dawson approached, interrupting their moment. "Mrs. Valero, Blackwell's asking to speak with you. Says he has information about your husband's death. You don't have to talk to him if you don't want to." Delilah straightened her shoulders. "No, I want to hear what he has to say." Blackwell sat on a bench outside the marshal's office, his hands cuffed behind his back. His fine clothes were now dusty and torn, blood staining the sleeve of his coat where a bullet had grazed him. As Delilah approached, flanked by Declan and Dawson, he looked up with undisguised hatred in his eyes. "Come to gloat, Mrs. Valero," he sneered. "I came to hear what you have to say about my husband," she replied calmly. Blackwell laughed a harsh, mirthless sound. "Your husband was a fool. He should have taken the money I offered him to keep quiet." "Thomas wasn't the kind of man who could be bought," Delilah said. "Every man has his price," Blackwell retorted. "I just didn't find his before he became a problem." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You know what your husband's last words were? He begged for his life, begged me to spare him for the sake of his unborn child." Declan took a step forward, but Delilah placed a restraining hand on his arm. "You're lying," she said to Blackwell, her voice steady. "Thomas would never beg a man like you for anything." "Believe what you want," Blackwell shrugged. "It won't bring him back, and it won't save you. Even if I go to prison, I have friends, powerful friends, who will make sure you never feel safe again." "That's enough," Dawson interjected. "Get him out of here," he ordered his deputies. As Blackwell was led away, Delilah felt a strange sense of closure. The man responsible for Thomas's death would face justice. The evidence was on its way to the governor. It was over. "Are you all right?" Declan asked quietly. "Yes," she replied, surprised to find it was true. "For the first time in months, I think I really am." In the days that followed, Copper Creek slowly returned to normal. Jack Tanner, recovering from his wounds, was hailed as a hero for refusing to betray Delilah's whereabouts despite Blackwell's threats. The governor himself sent a telegram confirming receipt of the documents and promising swift action against the Blackwell Mining Company. Delilah found herself staying at the town's small hotel, uncertain of her next steps. With Blackwell and his men in custody awaiting trial, she was free to travel to Helena as originally planned to stay with Thomas's cousin. Yet something held her back, or perhaps someone. Declan visited her daily, his wounded arm healing well. They would walk together through the town or sit in the hotel's small dining room, talking of inconsequential things and carefully avoiding discussion of the future. On the 7th day after Blackwell's arrest, Declan arrived at the hotel with his arm finally free of its sling. "Doc says it's healing clean," he reported as they set out for their now customary afternoon walk. "Still need to favor it for a while, but no lasting damage." "I'm glad," Delilah said sincerely. "How is Jack doing?" "Better every day. Says he'll be back at the livery within the week." Declan guided her toward a small park at the edge of town, a few benches set among pine trees, overlooking a stream that wound its way behind the settlement. As they settled onto a bench, Delilah sensed a change in Declan's demeanor, a nervous energy that was unlike his usual calm presence. "I heard from Marshal Dawson this morning," he said after a moment. "The trial's set for next month in Helena. He says you'll need to testify." "I expected as much," she replied. "I should probably leave for Helena soon, to prepare." Declan nodded, his eyes on the flowing water of the stream. "I've been thinking about that. About what comes after." Delilah's heart quickened. "Have you?" "My ranch," he began, then paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "It's not much compared to what you might be used to. Small house, good barn, about 60 head of cattle. Land's fertile, though, grows good hay, and there's a spring that never runs dry, even in summer." "It sounds lovely," Delilah said softly, encouraging him to continue. Declan turned to face her fully, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. What I'm trying to say, Delilah Badly, I know, is that I'd like you to consider staying. With me. She stared at him, the words she'd hoped to hear hanging between them. I know it's too soon, he hurried on. You're still grieving Thomas, and the baby will come in a few months. I'm not asking for promises or commitments, just a chance. He reached for her hand, holding it gently in his. I care for you, Delilah, more than I thought possible in such a short time, and I'd like the chance to care for you and your child, if you'll let me. Tears welled in Delilah's eyes, not from sadness, but from a sudden, overwhelming sense of possibility. Declan, You don't need to answer now, he assured her. Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know where I stand before you made plans to leave. I don't need time, she said, squeezing his hand. Not for this. These past days with you have shown me more about what I want, what I need than all the years before. She took a deep breath. I care for you too, Declan, and I think Thomas would want me to be happy, to find someone who would love his child as his own. Hope dawned in Declan's eyes. Is that a yes? It's a beginning, she replied with a smile that reached her heart. I think we both deserve a new beginning. As the setting sun painted the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Declan gently drew her closer. When I first saw you on that train platform, I never imagined where the path would lead us. I was running from my past, Delilah said softly, afraid and alone. Declan's arm slipped around her shoulders, solid and reassuring. Then I'll ride beside your future, he promised, his words a vow more binding than any ceremony could make. In that moment, with the stream murmuring beside them and the distant peaks of the Rocky Mountains standing sentinel over the valley, Delilah felt the last of her fear dissolve. The road ahead might not be easy. There was still a trial to face, a child to birth, a new life to build, but she would not walk it alone. As if sensing her thoughts, Declan pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. One step at a time, he murmured. That's all any of us can do. One step at a time, she agreed, resting her head against his shoulder. Together.